Hi guys, tonight we travel far beyond the reach of written history, beyond cities, kingdoms, and even the first villages. You find yourself standing beside a small fire beneath a sky crowded with stars. The air is cool. Somewhere in the darkness, water moves quietly over stones. The scent of smoke drifts through the night while distant animal calls echo across an open landscape. Around you, a handful of people sit in silence, watching the flames. They have no books, no maps, no clocks glowing beside their beds, yet somehow they understand this world in ways that might surprise you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, leave a comment sharing your location and your local time. Now, dim the lights and allow yourself to settle into the deep past. The fire crackles softly. The people around it seem relaxed, but appearances can be misleading. Life here is not easy. Every day requires attention. Every season brings new challenges. Food must be found. Shelter must be maintained. Dangers may appear with little warning. And yet these humans possess something remarkable. Not sharper claws, not thicker fur, not greater speed. Instead, they carry within them an extraordinary ability that helped their species survive for hundreds of thousands of years. Curiously, that ability has never entirely disappeared. To understand it, you first need to step into their world. You rise from the fire and begin walking. The ground beneath your feet feels uneven. Grass brushes against your legs. Above you, stars shine with unusual clarity because there are no cities to wash them away with electric light. Modern life often surrounds us with information. Notifications arrive constantly. Screens compete for attention. Sounds come from every direction. Here, things are different. Information still surrounds you, but it comes from the natural world. A distant bird call, the movement of wind through leaves, fresh tracks pressed into soft soil, the faint smell of rain hours before clouds arrive. Every detail matters. Researchers studying hunter-gatherer societies have found that survival often depended upon noticing subtle changes in the environment. A broken branch, a shift in animal behavior, or an unusual sound could provide valuable clues about food, weather, or danger. You continue walking across the moonlit landscape. At first, everything looks similar. Trees, rocks, grass, shadows. But slowly you begin noticing differences. One patch of ground appears slightly disturbed. A cluster of birds suddenly lifts into the air. The wind changes direction. Small observations begin connecting together. And this is where the story truly begins. The hidden human ability is not supernatural. It is not magical. In fact, you use pieces of it every day. The challenge is that modern life often buries it beneath layers of routine and distraction. As you move deeper into the ancient landscape, you imagine what survival required for your distant ancestors. Picture yourself waking before sunrise. The air feels cold against your skin. No weather forecast waits on a phone. No satellite images track incoming storms. You must learn directly from the world itself. Cloud shapes become meaningful. Bird movements become meaningful. Animal tracks become meaningful. The environment is constantly speaking. You simply need to learn how to listen. A mainstream historical fact is that anatomically, modern humans emerged in Africa roughly 300,000 years ago and spent the overwhelming majority of human history living as hunter-gatherers rather than farmers or city dwellers. For these early humans, awareness was not a hobby, it was survival. You kneel beside a muddy patch of ground. A series of footprints crosses the surface. To you, they might initially appear as random marks. To an experienced tracker, however, they tell a story. The size of the animal, its direction, its speed, perhaps even its condition. The ground becomes a kind of book, not written with letters, written with movement. Today, many people think of observation as something passive, but ancient humans often treated observation as an active skill. Their minds continuously gathered information from countless small details. Much of this happened automatically, much like how you can recognize a friend's face without consciously measuring every feature. The human brain excels at finding patterns, and over thousands of generations, this ability became one of our species' greatest strengths. The night gradually fades. A pale glow appears along the horizon. As dawn approaches, the landscape begins revealing itself. Rolling grasslands stretch into the distance. Small forests dot the terrain. Mist hangs above a nearby river. Everything feels calm. Yet beneath that calm lies constant calculation. Where are the animals moving? Where can fresh water be found? What dangers might be nearby? Early humans rarely had the luxury of ignoring such questions. Some researchers suggest that the human mind evolved specifically to handle enormous amounts of environmental information. Others argue that social relationships played an even larger role in shaping intelligence. The discussion remains active among scholars today. Either way, attention became one of humanity's most valuable tools, and attention is where our hidden ability starts to emerge. You follow the riverbank. Morning sunlight spreads across the water. The surface sparkles gently. Fish occasionally disturb the current. Nearby, a group of people gathers edible plants. They move slowly, patiently, almost casually, yet their eyes remain alert. They know which plants are useful, which are dangerous, which are ready for harvest. This knowledge did not appear overnight. It accumulated through generations of observation. Parents taught children, grandparents shared experience, communities remembered what worked. The result was an astonishing understanding of local environments. A quirky historical tidbit is that some traditional hunter-gatherer groups could identify hundreds of plant species within their territory, often recognizing subtle differences that outsiders struggle to notice. You might compare it to recognizing hundreds of faces. At first it sounds impossible. Then you remember that many people effortlessly recognize countless celebrities, co-workers, relatives, and acquaintances. The brain adapts to whatever information matters most. For ancient humans, nature mattered. A breeze moves across the landscape. You pause. Something feels different. The birds have become quieter. The air seems heavier. Clouds are gathering far away. Without checking a weather app, you already sense a change approaching, perhaps not consciously, perhaps only as a feeling, and that feeling touches upon one of the most fascinating aspects of human awareness. Our brains often detect patterns before we fully realize it. Small clues accumulate beneath conscious thought. Eventually they produce a sense that something is different, a sense that many people casually call intuition. Throughout this journey, you will discover how often early humans relied upon such abilities, not because they possessed mysterious powers, but because they spent their lives immersed in observation, hour after hour, day after day, generation after generation. The hidden human ability we're beginning to uncover is the capacity to absorb vast amounts of information from the surrounding world and transform it into meaningful understanding. It helped people survive Ice Age winters. It helped them find food. It helped them navigate unfamiliar landscapes. And remarkably, traces of it remain inside you today. The sun climbs higher. The camp behind you grows busy. Voices drift through the morning air. Smoke rises from fresh fires. Children laugh near the riverbank. The ancient world is waking. And your journey into one of humanity's oldest forgotten strengths has only just begun. Morning unfolds gradually across the landscape. The cool mist that hovered above the river begins to thin as sunlight spreads over the grasslands. Dew glitters on every blade. Small insects move among wildflowers. Somewhere in the distance, birds call back and forth across the open terrain. You walk away from the camp and follow a narrow animal trail winding between low hills. The people behind you seem relaxed. Yet if you pay close attention, you notice something interesting. Nobody appears distracted. Nobody stares absent-mindedly into the distance. Nobody seems lost inside their own thoughts for very long. Instead, their awareness remains gently connected to the world around them, not tense, not fearful, simply attentive. This difference may seem small at first, but for much of human history, it was essential. The hidden ability you're exploring tonight is not merely observation. It is the remarkable human capacity to gather information continuously from the environment, often without conscious effort, and transform it into understanding. In other words, your ancestors were constantly listening to the world, not only with their ears, with their eyes, their sense of smell, their sense of touch, and even their ability to notice patterns before fully understanding them. You climb a low ridge overlooking the valley. Below, several people move slowly through tall grass. A few children accompany them. At first, it appears that nothing special is happening. Then you begin noticing how often they pause. One person studies a distant flock of birds. Another examines broken vegetation. A child points toward fresh tracks near a muddy stream. Everyone seems engaged in a quiet conversation with the landscape itself. Today, many people think of attention as something that requires effort. You focus on a task. You concentrate. You try not to become distracted. For hunter-gatherers, attention often worked differently. It flowed naturally toward meaningful information. The environment was full of clues, and those clues mattered. You stop beside a cluster of stones warmed by the morning sun. The air smells fresh. Nearby, wind stirs leaves high in a grove of trees. One of the adults suddenly turns their head. Nothing obvious has happened, at least not to you. Then a few moments later, a deer emerges from the forest edge. The person noticed something before you did. Perhaps a faint sound, perhaps movement, perhaps a combination of tiny details that never reached conscious awareness. This ability remains surprisingly familiar. Have you ever sensed someone watching you, only to turn around and discover they actually were? Have you ever felt that something seemed wrong before identifying exactly what it was? Modern scientists often explain such experiences through subconscious pattern recognition. Your brain absorbs far more information than you consciously process. Tiny observations accumulate below awareness. Eventually, they create a feeling, a signal, an impression. The feeling arrives first. The explanation follows later. As you continue walking, you begin paying closer attention yourself. The landscape becomes richer, more detailed. You hear different bird calls instead of simply hearing birds. You notice variations in wind direction. You recognize subtle changes in the ground beneath your feet. The world becomes more complex and perhaps more beautiful. Researchers studying perception have discovered that the human brain continuously filters enormous amounts of sensory information. Only a fraction reaches conscious awareness. Yet much of the hidden information still influences decisions and behavior. The realization is both fascinating and slightly humbling. You're noticing less than you think and understanding more than you realize. The valley grows warmer as the morning advances. Groups of people spread out across the landscape, gathering food and information. Those two activities often go together. Finding food requires knowledge. Knowledge requires attention. Attention requires practice. The cycle repeats every day. A mainstream historical fact is that hunter-gatherer societies often possess detailed knowledge of local ecosystems, including animal behavior, plant life, seasonal changes, and weather patterns accumulated through generations of experience. This knowledge was rarely written down. It lived inside people, inside stories, inside habits, inside observation. You arrive at a small stream. Clear water moves gently over smooth stones. Several children kneel near the bank. They are watching fish, not catching them, watching them, patiently, You sit nearby and observe. Minutes pass, nothing dramatic happens. The children continue studying the water. At first, their behaviour seems unusual. Then you realise something important. They are learning, not through lectures, not through books, but through direct experience. Every movement teaches something. Every observation becomes part of memory. Many traditional societies relied heavily on learning through participation rather than formal instruction. Children often developed practical skills by observing adults and engaging directly with daily life. The process was slow, natural, continuous, rather like the flow of the stream itself. A curious historical tidbit is that some indigenous trackers could identify individual animals from footprints alone, distinguishing not only species, but specific creatures based on subtle characteristics of their tracks. To many modern people, that sounds almost impossible. Yet imagine trying to explain facial recognition to someone who'd never seen another human face. Abilities often seem magical until you understand the years of practice behind them. The sun climbs higher. Shadows shorten. A warm breeze drifts across the valley. You begin noticing something else. The people around you rarely separate themselves from the environment. They do not speak about nature as something distant. They live inside it. Their awareness extends outward constantly. The river matters. The trees matter. The animals matter. The weather matters. Everything connects. This relationship shaped the human mind for tens of thousands of years, and traces of that relationship remain inside you. Even now, even sitting comfortably in a modern home, perhaps especially then, think about how quickly your attention shifts when you hear an unexpected sound at night. A creak in the hallway, a distant thump, a dog barking somewhere outside. Your ancestors benefited from reacting to unusual signals. Those instincts still operate. Most of the time they simply have less important work to do. You follow the stream into a shaded forest. The temperature drops immediately. Sunlight filters through leaves overhead. The ground feels softer here. Birdsong echoes between tree trunks. The forest seems peaceful, yet it's also full of information. A snap branch, fresh animal droppings, scratches on bark, hidden nests. Each detail tells part of a story. Some scholars argue that language evolved partly to share environmental knowledge efficiently among group members. Others believe social relationships played the dominant role. The question remains an active topic of research. Either way, humans became extraordinarily skilled at gathering and exchanging information, and that skill may be one of our species' greatest achievements. The afternoon light begins to soften, the forest grows quieter. You pause beside an old tree and rest your hand against a rough bark. For a moment, everything feels still. Yet beneath the stillness, countless signals continue moving through the world. Birds communicate, animals search for food, clouds drift across distant skies. Plants respond to sunlight, water shapes the land grain by grain, and humans, perhaps more than any other creature, possess the ability to notice these patterns and connect them together. That ability helped your ancestors survive. It helped them learn. It helped them adapt to changing worlds. Most importantly, it helped them understand places they had never seen before. As evening slowly approaches, you leave the forest and return toward the camp. Smoke rises into the golden air. Voices drift across the grasslands. The hidden human ability continues to reveal itself, not as a single power, not as a secret talent, but as an ancient partnership between attention and understanding. A partnership that has accompanied humanity for hundreds of thousands of years, and tomorrow, you will listen even more closely. The next morning arrives quietly. A pale band of light stretches across the eastern horizon, while the stars slowly fade from view. The camp stirs gently around you. A few people add fresh wood to the fire. Others move toward the river carrying woven containers. The air feels cool and clean, carrying the scent of damp earth and wild grass. You step away from the camp once more, today. Your path leads deeper into the landscape. The hidden human ability you've been exploring is becoming clearer with every step. It is not simply seeing, not simply hearing. It is the capacity to notice patterns within a world overflowing with information. And nowhere was this more important than in the vast environments inhabited by our ancient ancestors. You climb a low ridge overlooking miles of open terrain. The view is breathtaking. Rolling grasslands stretch toward distant mountains. Thin lines of forest follow rivers and streams. Herds of animals move across the plains like dark shadows drifting through the morning mist. For a moment, you simply stand and watch. The world feels immense and perhaps a little intimidating. Imagine living here without roads, without signs, without satellite navigation, without any guarantee that food would be waiting beyond the next hill. The landscape itself becomes your guide. Every detail matters. Every observation contributes to survival. This ability to read the environment was one of humanity's greatest advantages during the long ages before civilization. The prehistoric world often demanded careful attention. Weather could shift rapidly. Animal migrations could transform entire regions. Water sources could appear or disappear depending on the season. Humans who noticed patterns gained an important edge. Those who ignored them faced greater risks. You begin walking downhill toward a broad valley. As you move, something interesting happens. The landscape starts looking different than it did a few days ago. Not because it changed, because you changed. You now notice animal paths cutting through tall grass. You recognize places where water collects after rain. You see how certain plants grow in specific conditions. The valley has become more detailed, more alive. This transformation mirrors something that researchers observe in many traditional tracking cultures. Experienced trackers often perceive information that beginners completely miss, not because they possess better eyesight, but because they know what to look for. Their brains organize information differently. Patterns that appear invisible to one person become obvious to another. You pause near a patch of soft soil. Fresh tracks crossed the ground. At first glance, they seem random. Then you kneel closer. Some tracks overlap others. A few prints appear deeper than the rest. The direction changes slightly near a stand of trees. Suddenly, the scene feels less like a collection of marks and more like a story. Something moved through here. Something paused. Something changed direction. The ground remembers. You are learning how to listen. A mainstream historical fact is that hunter-gatherers developed sophisticated tracking abilities that allowed them to locate prey, avoid predators, and navigate large territories long before the invention of written records. The skill required patience, practice, and countless hours of observation. You continue through the valley. The morning sun warms your shoulders. Insects buzz among flowers. Birds move between branches overhead. Everything seems peaceful. Yet beneath the peaceful surface, information flows constantly. A flock of birds suddenly changes direction. A distant animal raises its head. Wind shifts. Clouds gather over the mountains. The environment never truly stops communicating. The challenge lies in recognizing what matters. Modern life sometimes gives the impression that information exists primarily on screens. But for most of human history, information lived in the physical world, in clouds, in rivers, in footprints, in sounds carried by the wind. And perhaps most importantly, in patterns. The human brain excels at detecting patterns, sometimes so well that it finds patterns where none actually exist. You have probably looked at clouds and imagined familiar shapes, or glanced at a rock formation and thought it resembled a face. This tendency comes from an ancient mental system designed to identify meaningful signals quickly. Better to mistake a shadow for danger than overlook genuine danger. At least from an evolutionary perspective, Some researchers propose that pattern recognition became one of the defining features of human cognition. Others emphasize cooperation and social intelligence as the primary drivers of success. The discussion continues among experts today. Both possibilities may contain pieces of the truth, after all. Survival rarely depended upon a single skill. It depended upon many abilities working together. The valley narrows as you approach a river. Water sparkles beneath the midday sun. The sound of flowing current fills the air. Several people from the camp have arrived before you. They are studying the shoreline. Again, nobody appears rushed. There is a calmness to their movements, a deliberate quality. They observe first, act second. This rhythm appears repeatedly throughout human history. Observe, interpret, respond. The sequence sounds simple, yet it helped humans spread across nearly every environment on Earth. Deserts, forests, mountains, grasslands, frozen tundra. Each landscape demanded different knowledge, yet the underlying ability remained the same. Pay attention, learn patterns, adapt. A fascinating historical tidbit comes from traditional tracking communities in southern Africa, where experienced trackers could sometimes reconstruct detailed sequences of events from footprints alone, identifying not just what happened, but often when it happened. To modern ears, that sounds almost like detective work. In a sense, it was. Except the clues came from nature rather than crime scenes. You sit beside the river and rest for a while. The water moves steadily past. Dragonflies hover above the surface. The warmth of the afternoon encourages a pleasant sense of relaxation. As you watch the current, you begin thinking about something curious. Humans are often described as tool users, and rightly so. Stone tools transformed survival. Fire transformed survival. Later, agriculture and technology transformed survival. But perhaps the most important tool was always the human mind itself. Not merely intelligence, awareness, the capacity to gather information continuously from the surrounding world. Even now, your brain performs extraordinary work behind the scenes. It monitors sounds while you sleep. It notices changes in facial expressions during conversations. It identifies familiar voices almost instantly. Most of this happens without effort, without conscious planning. The ancient ability remains active. It simply operates in different environments. The afternoon gradually softens. Long shadows begin stretching across the valley floor. A cool breeze arrives from the mountains. The landscape takes on a golden glow. You leave the river and start walking back toward camp. Along the way, you notice details that would have escaped your attention at the beginning of this journey. The shape of tracks, the direction of wind, the behavior of birds, the texture of the ground. None of these observations feel extraordinary anymore. They feel natural. Perhaps that is the most revealing part of all. The hidden human ability was never truly hidden from your ancestors. It was part of everyday life. A constant conversation between people and the world around them. As evening approaches, smoke rises once again from the campfires ahead. Voices drift across the cooling air. Children run between shelters. The familiar scent of wood smoke welcomes you back. You settle near the fire as darkness slowly returns. Above, the first stars begin appearing, and somewhere beyond the circle of light, the ancient landscape continues speaking in thousands of small ways. The question is not whether the world still offers clues. The question is whether we remember how to notice them. The fire burns low as night settles over the camp. Orange light flickers across faces. Shadows dance softly on the ground beyond the edge of the firelight. Darkness stretches across the ancient landscape. You sit quietly and listen. The distant call of an owl drifts through the air, somewhere near the river. An animal moves through reeds. The breeze carries the scent of damp earth and wood smoke. Nobody seems alarmed by these sounds. In fact, Most people barely react at all, not because they are ignoring the world around them. Quite the opposite. They know these sounds, they understand them, and that understanding reveals another layer of the hidden ability that helped humans survive for countless generations. The ability was not simply noticing information, it was learning which information mattered. This distinction is important. After all, the world contains far more details than any mind could process consciously. Your ancestors had to become experts at filtering. They learned to distinguish ordinary sounds from unusual ones, ordinary tracks from significant ones, ordinary weather from dangerous weather. This skill transformed attention into survival. As the night deepens, you eventually drift into sleep beside the fading fire. The stars wheel slowly overhead. Hours pass, then morning arrives. Cool air brushes against your skin as the first light spreads across the horizon. Today, you will travel with a hunting party. Several people prepare shortly after dawn. Their tools are simple: wooden shafts, stone points, animal hide clothing. Nothing about their appearance suggests advanced technology, yet appearances can be deceiving. What they lack in machinery, they compensate for with knowledge, and that knowledge begins long before the hunt itself. You follow them into the grasslands. The landscape glows softly beneath the morning sun. Fresh dew covers the ground. Birds call from scattered trees. The group moves quietly, not silently. Quietly. There is a difference. They are not trying to become invisible. They are simply paying attention. Every few minutes someone pauses, a glance toward distant hills, a brief look at the ground, a moment spent studying the wind. The pace feels almost leisurely, yet beneath the calm surface, remarkable mental work is taking place. You stop near a patch of disturbed soil. One hunter kneels, the others gather nearby. For several moments, nobody speaks, they simply observe. Then the group changes direction, apparently. The ground revealed useful information. To you, it remains difficult to see. To them, it seems obvious. This difference highlights an important truth about human perception. People often see what they have learned to see. The environment has not changed, only the observer has changed. Modern examples exist everywhere. A mechanic notices sounds in an engine that most people never hear. A musician detects tiny variations in pitch. A birdwatcher identifies species from distant silhouettes. Training transforms perception. For prehistoric hunters, the landscape itself became their classroom. A mainstream historical fact is that hunter-gatherers often relied on detailed tracking skills and environmental knowledge rather than brute force when locating and pursuing game animals. Success required patience, observation, memory, and careful interpretation of clues. You continue across the plains. Hours pass. The sun climbs steadily higher. The group follows a winding route that initially seems random, then patterns begin emerging. The hunters frequently choose terrain that offers good visibility. They avoid unnecessarily noisy areas. They pay close attention to water sources. Every decision reflects accumulated experience. This knowledge didn't appear suddenly. It developed over generations. Parents taught children. Elders shared lessons. Communities remembered successful strategies. The result was an extraordinary understanding of the natural world. You reach a small rise overlooking a broad valley. Below, several animals graze peacefully. The hunters stop immediately. Nobody rushes forward. Nobody celebrates prematurely. Instead, everyone watches. The animals become the focus of complete attention. You begin noticing details yourself. Which direction are they facing? How close are they to shelter? How are they reacting to the wind? The questions arise naturally. Your mind is beginning to think like theirs. The hidden ability is not some forgotten superpower. It is a deeply human tendency to gather information, identify patterns, and predict outcomes. That last part may be the most important. Prediction. The hunters are not merely observing the animals, they are anticipating future behavior. If the herd moves this way, then something else may happen. If the wind shifts, another possibility emerges. The brain constantly creates expectations, then compares them against reality. Many neuroscientists believe prediction plays a central role in human perception itself, according to some theories. The brain continuously generates expectations about incoming information and updates those expectations as new evidence appears. In other words, your mind is not simply recording reality, it is actively interpreting it. You rest beneath the shade of a tree during the warmest part of the afternoon. The grass sways gently. Insects buzz lazily in the sunlight. Nearby, a few hunters exchange quiet observations. Nothing feels rushed. This calmness reflects another aspect of ancient awareness: patience. Modern life often rewards speed, fast responses, instant updates, immediate answers. Hunter-gatherer life frequently rewarded patience instead. Important information sometimes required waiting, watching, listening, allowing patterns to reveal themselves. A fascinating historical tidbit comes from persistence hunting, a technique documented among certain traditional hunting cultures, rather than relying entirely on speed. Hunters could pursue animals over long distances, using careful observation and endurance to gradually wear them down. The practice required remarkable awareness, track after track, clue after clue, hour after hour. The landscape itself guided the pursuit. As afternoon drifts toward evening, the group begins moving again. Long shadows stretch across the valley floor. The air grows cooler. You notice how much information the environment provides once you slow down enough to observe it. Bird behavior changes as evening approaches. The angle of sunlight transforms familiar terrain. Animal activity shifts. Even the smell of the air seems different. The world is constantly changing, and ancient humans learned to recognize those changes. Some researchers propose that humans evolved an especially flexible form of intelligence because our ancestors encountered constantly changing environments. Others emphasize social cooperation as the key factor. The debate remains lively among scholars, regardless of which explanation proves most accurate. One thing seems clear. Humans became masters of adaptation, and adaptation begins with awareness. The hunting party eventually turns toward camp. The journey back feels peaceful. Golden light washes across the grasslands. Clouds glow softly near the horizon. The familiar scent of smoke becomes noticeable long before the camp itself appears. You smile slightly when you realize what just happened. Without thinking, you recognized a clue, a scent carried on the wind, a small piece of environmental information, exactly the sort of thing your ancestors relied upon every day. As darkness approaches, fires begin appearing across the landscape. Voices drift through the cooling air. Children run between shelters. The camp feels welcoming, comfortable, alive. You settle beside the fire once more. The flames crackle gently. Above, stars begin emerging one by one. Today you followed hunters across an ancient world, but perhaps the most important discovery was not the animals they tracked. It was the realization that human awareness itself can be trained. The world offers countless signals. Your ancestors became experts at recognizing them, and somewhere beneath modern routines and glowing screens, that ancient ability still waits quietly inside you. The evening fire burns steadily as darkness settles across the camp. Soft conversations drift through the cool air. Sparks rise toward the stars before disappearing into the night. Nearby, someone carefully repairs a tool. Children sit close to older family members. A dog stretches beside the warmth of the flames and lets out a contented sigh. The day has been long, not exhausting, simply full of observations, full of small details, full of information gathered from the landscape. now. As you sit watching the fire, you begin to understand something important. The hidden human ability was never used only for hunting or for avoiding danger. It also helped people find food in quieter ways. Tomorrow, you will follow the gatherers, and in many ways, their knowledge may be even more astonishing. The stars slowly wheel overhead. Eventually sleep arrives. The night passes peacefully, and when morning comes, the camp awakens beneath a sky washed with pale gold. Mist lingers near the river. Birdsong echoes from nearby trees. The scent of damp earth rises from the ground. You join a small group preparing to leave. Unlike the hunters, these people carry woven baskets and digging tools. Their pace seems relaxed, unhurried, almost casual, yet appearances, once again, can be misleading. The knowledge carried by these gatherers represents generations of careful observation. You follow them into a landscape filled with grasses, shrubs, and scattered woodland. At first glance, everything appears remarkably similar. Green leaves, brown stems, clusters of flowers, patches of berries. It all blends together. Then the gatherers begin pointing things out. One plant is useful, another is dangerous. A third can be eaten only during a certain season. A fourth has medicinal properties. Suddenly the landscape transforms. What once looked uniform now contains endless variety. The world becomes filled with distinctions, subtle differences, important details. You realize that awareness is not only about noticing things, it is also about knowing what those things mean. The group pauses beside a patch of low-growing plants. Several people begin collecting leaves. The process appears simple, yet you notice how carefully they choose. Some leaves are taken, others are ignored. Nobody seems uncertain. The decisions happen almost automatically. Years of experience have made recognition effortless. This ability resembles something familiar from modern life. An experienced chef can glance at ingredients and instantly recognize quality. A gardener notices tiny signs of plant health. A skilled mechanic hears a sound and immediately identifies a problem. Practice changes perception. The more you know, the more you see. A mainstream historical fact is that hunter-gatherer societies often depended upon extensive botanical knowledge, identifying edible, medicinal, and useful plants across their local environments. This knowledge could mean the difference between survival and hardship. Especially during difficult seasons, you continue deeper into the woodland. Sunlight filters through branches overhead. The air feels cooler here, birds move among the leaves. The forest floor is covered with ferns and fallen branches. One of the gatherers stops suddenly. You pause as well. For a moment, nothing seems unusual. Then you notice a cluster of mushrooms growing beside a rotting log. The gatherer examines them carefully. Only a few are collected. The rest remain untouched. The distinction may appear minor, yet it reflects remarkable expertise. Many edible plants have dangerous lookalikes. Recognizing the difference requires attention and memory brings us to another fascinating aspect of the hidden ability. Humans are exceptionally skilled at storing environmental information. Not perfectly, of course. Memory has many flaws, but compared to most animals, our ability to remember useful patterns is extraordinary. Think about how easily people remember routes through familiar neighborhoods, or favorite restaurants, or shortcuts through a city. Your ancestors applied similar abilities to landscapes far larger and often far more challenging. A curious historical tidbit is that some traditional foraging communities possessed detailed mental maps containing thousands of useful locations, including water sources, seasonal food patches, and shelter sites. These maps existed entirely within memory. No paper required, no digital backup. Just human knowledge passed from generation to generation. The forest opens onto a sunny meadow. Wildflowers sway gently in the breeze, butterflies drift through the warm air. The group spreads out and begins searching among the vegetation. At first, the activity appears random, then patterns emerge. People know exactly where to look. Certain plants prefer certain soils. Certain berries thrive under particular conditions. Nothing is accidental. Everything reflects accumulated understanding. You kneel beside a patch of flowers and imagine learning all of this from scratch. The task feels overwhelming. Hundreds of species, countless seasonal variations, different weather conditions, different landscapes, and yet humans repeatedly mastered such challenges. This success depended upon one of our greatest strengths, the ability to learn from experience, to recognize patterns, and to pass knowledge forward. Many anthropologists have noted that human culture acts as a kind of shared memory system. Knowledge does not remain trapped inside one individual. Instead, communities preserve and transmit information across generations. This process helped humans adapt to environments around the world, from tropical forests to frozen tundra, from deserts to mountain valleys. The afternoon grows warmer. You rest beneath the shade of a large tree. A gentle breeze moves through the branches overhead. The sound is soft and soothing. Nearby, the gatherers continue working as you watch them. Another realization begins to emerge. The hidden ability is not merely awareness of the present moment. It also involves prediction. The gatherers know where food will likely appear next season. They understand how weather affects growth. They anticipate future opportunities. The brain constantly moves between observation and expectation. What is happening now? What will happen next? These questions have accompanied humanity for millennia. Some historians suggest that increasing environmental knowledge laid important foundations for later developments such as agriculture. Others argue that social organization played the larger role. The exact balance remains debated among scholars. Whatever the answer, observation clearly mattered greatly. As the afternoon light softens, the group begins preparing for the journey home. Baskets are fuller now. The forest glows with warm golden tones. Birdsong gradually shifts toward evening patterns. You start walking back toward camp. The familiar trail feels different than it did earlier. You notice landmarks more easily. A distinctive tree, a bend in the stream, a cluster of rocks. Your own awareness is changing, not dramatically, just enough to remind you that perception can be trained. The human mind adapts to what it practices. Ancient people practiced attention every day, not because it was fashionable, not because it improved productivity, because it helped them understand the world. The camp comes into view as the sun approaches the horizon. Smoke rises into the evening sky. Children play near the riverbank. Voices carry softly through the cooling air. You return with the gatherers and settle beside the fire. The flames flicker gently. The scent of cooking food drifts across the camp. Above, stars begin appearing one by one. Today you learn that awareness is not only about spotting danger or tracking animals, it is also about recognizing abundance, finding opportunity, understanding seasons, remembering places, connecting observations across years and generations. The hidden human ability continues to reveal itself, not as a single skill, but as an entire way of engaging with the world, and as the fire crackles softly beside you. That ancient relationship between attention and understanding feels a little less distant than before. Night settles more deeply now, wrapping the camp in a calm, steady darkness. The fire at the centre has burned down into glowing embers. Soft red light flickers across resting bodies and quiet shelters. The sounds of the day fade one by one until only the river remains, moving gently in the distance. You lie near the warmth and look upward. The sky feels enormous. Stars scatter in every direction, unbroken by artificial light. In this ancient world, Night is not something to be avoided. It is something to be read, just like the land and the wind, and here, in this quiet stillness, another layer of the hidden human ability begins to appear. Memory, not memory as a static archive, but memory as a living tool, something active, something shared, something shaped by repetition, story, and attention. Around the fading fire earlier in the evening, you heard fragments of stories pass between people, not written, not recorded, simply spoken, again and again, until they became part of the group itself. These stories are not entertainment in the modern sense. They are instruction. They carry knowledge about animals, seasons, safe paths, and dangerous places. They also carry something subtler. They teach how to notice. You close your eyes for a moment and listen to the wind passing through grass. It feels gentle, almost rhythmic, in early human groups. Evenings like this were often when knowledge was strengthened. People did not scroll through information or store it externally. Instead, they reinforced it through shared repetition and lived experience. A well-established historical understanding is that oral traditions played a central role in preserving survival knowledge long before written language existed, allowing communities to transmit complex environmental understanding across generations. Yet the details of how accurate or structured these systems were remain an active subject of discussion among researchers. Some suggest that stories acted like mental maps. Others believe they functioned more like emotional anchors for memory. Both interpretations may hold partial truth. You shift slightly beside the fire. The ground is still warm from the day, nearby. Someone murmurs softly in their sleep. The world feels stable here, but stability in this time is never guaranteed. It depends on knowledge, and knowledge depends on attention. Earlier, you watched how people read the land during hunting and gathering. Now you begin to understand how they also read time itself, not through clocks, but through cycles, the position of the sun, the behavior of animals, the flowering of plants, the cooling of air before seasonal change. Time, in this world, is not abstract. It is physical, visible, experienced directly. You imagine how deeply connected people must have been to these rhythms. Missing a seasonal cue could mean losing food. Ignoring a pattern could mean missing shelter or safety. So awareness was not optional, it was constant. The fire pops softly. A spark rises and disappears into the night sky. You think about how modern humans often rely on systems outside themselves to track information. Calendars, devices, notifications. In contrast, ancient humans carried much of that awareness internally, not perfectly, not infallibly, but intimately. A small, often overlooked historical insight is that many traditional societies developed highly detailed ecological calendars based on recurring natural events such as animal migrations, plant cycles, and atmospheric changes rather than fixed numerical dates. These calendars were flexible, living, adapted to local environments. You open your eyes again. The stars seem brighter now, the silence deeper, and for a moment, it feels as if the entire landscape is breathing slowly around you. Even in rest, the human mind does not fully stop observing. It listens, it processes, it integrates. This continuous background awareness is part of what allowed early humans to survive in unpredictable environments, not through constant conscious effort, but through quiet, ongoing perception. You notice how the wind shifts slightly, how the fire leans in one direction, how distant animals occasionally call out into the night, even while resting. The mind collects fragments of information, and somewhere within that quiet process, meaning begins to form, not immediately, not clearly, but gradually, like a pattern emerging from scattered points of light. As the night deepens further, you reflect on how knowledge in this world was never separate from life itself. It was embedded in movement, in observation, in participation. Children learned by watching adults. Adults learned by watching nature. Everyone remained both teacher and student in modern life. Learning is often separated into structured environments, classrooms, courses, manuals, but for most of human history, learning happened continuously within daily survival. You turn slightly toward the fire, feeling its warmth on your skin. The embers glow softly, like a heartbeat slowing. The surrounding darkness feels less empty now and more full of presence, not threatening, simply alive. Some anthropologists describe this kind of environment as cognitively demanding, but also richly informative. Others argue that modern environments create entirely different but equally complex forms of awareness. The comparison is still being explored. Either way, it is clear that human perception has always adapted to its surroundings, and tonight, yours is adapting again, slowly, quietly, naturally. A gentle breeze passes through the camp, carrying the scent of smoke and earth. Somewhere in the distance, a nightbird calls, then silence returns. Not absolute silence, but layered silence. The kind filled with subtle signals. You begin to understand that the hidden human ability is not about extraordinary senses, it is about relationship, between mind and environment, between observation and meaning, between what is seen and what is understood. As sleep approaches, the boundary between awareness and dreaming begins to soften, and in that soft space, the ancient world continues speaking, quietly, patiently, like it always has. Morning arrives with a soft glow that spreads slowly across the horizon. The night's chill still lingers in the air, but the first warmth of sunlight begins to settle over the camp. Dew clings to grass and low shrubs, catching light like scattered fragments of glass. The fire is reduced to pale ash, though a few embers still hold faint traces of heat beneath the surface. You rise quietly. Around you, others are already moving, not in haste, not with urgency, but with the steady rhythm of people who understand that each morning carries its own set of signals. Water must be checked. Food must be gathered. Paths must be assessed. The day is never separate from the land itself. It is shaped by it. Today, you follow a different kind of journey, not hunting, not gathering, but travelling with those who navigate, those who move between familiar places and distant ones, carrying knowledge of direction, distance, and terrain. They begin walking before the sun has fully lifted above the hills. The ground stretches outward in wide, open layers of grass and stone. There are no marked roads, no visible boundaries, only subtle changes in the landscape, a shift in elevation, a bend in a river, a line of trees breaking the horizon. At first, it feels easy to become disoriented. Yet the group moves with confidence. They rarely hesitate. You notice how they constantly observe the environment, even while speaking softly among themselves. A glance at the position of the sun, a brief pause when clouds pass overhead, a moment of stillness when the wind changes direction. Navigation here is not a separate skill, it is woven into perception itself. A well-established historical fact is that long before written maps existed, many human groups navigated vast territories using environmental cues such as celestial positioning, wind patterns, and landmark recognition. But how exactly this knowledge was organized and remembered varies widely among cultures and remains partially reconstructed by modern researchers. You continue along a winding path that is not truly a path in the modern sense. It is more like a memory traced across the land. A route known through repetition, through story, through lived experience. At one point, the group pauses on a small rise. You look around, expecting uncertainty. Instead, there is calm discussion. Someone points toward a distant formation of hills, Another adjusts their stance slightly, studying the angle of the sun. Then the group changes direction. No maps are consulted. No tools are referenced, and yet the decision feels certain. You begin to realize that orientation in this world is not about finding a fixed point on a diagram. It is about maintaining a relationship with everything around you: sun above, ground below, wind across the skin, movement of animals in the distance. Even memory plays a role. A place once visited becomes easier to recognize again. A subtle landmark remembered becomes a guide. As you walk, you notice your own awareness beginning to shift. The landscape is no longer a uniform field. It becomes segmented, distinct, recognizable. A rocky outcrop resembles a landmark you saw earlier. A cluster of trees forms a repeating pattern in the distance. Even the sound of wind seems to change depending on direction. The human brain is remarkably capable of constructing mental maps without external aids. Neuroscientists often describe this ability through the concept of spatial memory, involving regions of the brain that integrate sensory input into coherent internal representations of space. Yet how this ability evolved in detail is still actively studied. Some researchers suggest it was crucial for survival during long-distance migrations. Others believe it developed alongside social coordination and resource sharing. The discussion continues. As midday approaches, the group rests near a shallow stream. Water flows gently over smooth stones, creating a steady, calming sound. You sit nearby and observe how naturally everyone settles into patterns of rest. Some people check tools, others drink water, a few simply sit and watch the surroundings, even in rest. Awareness does not disappear. It simply softens. A small but interesting historical observation comes from accounts of traditional nomadic societies, where movement across landscapes was often guided by accumulated knowledge of seasonal resources rather than fixed routes, allowing flexible adaptation to changing environmental conditions. This adaptability was essential because the land itself was never constant. It shifted with weather, with climate, with time. You dip your hand into the stream. The water feels cold and clear. For a moment, everything becomes quiet. The world reduces to sensation: sound of water, touch of stone, warmth of air. This simplicity feels grounding, and yet beneath it lies a complex network of understanding that your ancestors carried constantly. Where water flows, where animals gather, where plants grow, where danger might appear. The afternoon journey resumes. Clouds drift slowly overhead, casting moving shadows across the ground. You begin to notice how navigation changes subtly depending on light conditions. In brighter moments, distant landmarks are easier to identify. When shadows stretch longer, texture and sound become more important. The environment constantly shifts, and attention must shift with it. Some anthropologists argue that this kind of flexible awareness was central to human evolution, allowing early populations to expand into diverse habitats across continents. Others suggest that social learning was the key driver, emphasizing the transmission of knowledge within groups. Both perspectives highlight something essential. Human survival has always depended on learning how to see the world correctly. As evening begins its slow return, the group finally approaches a familiar region. The terrain feels different now, not because it has changed, but because it has become known. Recognition replaces uncertainty. Familiarity replaces caution. You feel the subtle relief that comes from understanding where you are. Smoke rises in the distance. The camp appears gradually along the horizon, and as you walk toward it, you realize something simple but profound. Navigation is not only about finding places, it is about understanding how everything connects: land to sky, memory to observation, movement to awareness. By the time you return to the fire, the stars are beginning to reappear. And once again, the world settles into its quiet rhythm of signals waiting to be noticed. Plus night returns gently, without urgency, as if the world is simply exhaling after a long day. The camp has grown quiet again. Fires burn lower now, reduced to steady points of orange light scattered through the darkness. People sit or lie close to the warmth, their movements slower, their voices softer. The river nearby continues its constant motion, a sound that never fully disappears. You find a place beside the fire and settle in, above you. The sky is clear once more, stars appear in dense clusters, forming patterns that feel both familiar and deeply ancient in this world. The night sky is not decoration, it is orientation, it is memory, it is meaning. And here, another layer of the hidden human ability begins to emerge, the ability to recognize faces, not just human faces, but patterns in general, the mind that reads emotion, intention, and identity. You watch as people in the camp interact with ease, even in low light. They recognize each other instantly, not through clothing or objects, but through subtle details, a posture, a movement, a familiar rhythm of walking or speaking. This ability is so natural that it is rarely noticed, yet it is deeply complex. In the ancient world, recognizing individuals was essential for survival. Knowing who was trustworthy, who belonged to the group, and who was unfamiliar could determine safety or danger. There were no written records of identity, no documents, only memory and perception. A widely accepted historical understanding is that strong social recognition skills played a crucial role in early human communities, strengthening cooperation and group cohesion in environments where survival depended on trust and shared knowledge. However, researchers continue to explore whether these skills developed primarily for social reasons or as a byproduct of general pattern recognition abilities. You shift slightly closer to the fire. The warmth feels steady against the cool night air. Nearby, two people speak quietly, even without hearing every word clearly. You can sense familiarity in their interaction. There is comfort in their shared understanding. You begin to realize that the hidden ability is not limited to the natural world. It also extends deeply into the social world. Every gesture carries meaning. Every expression conveys information. Every pause or glance may reveal intention. In modern life, much of this still exists beneath awareness. You recognize a friend's mood before they speak. You sense tension in a room before anything is said. You notice when someone behaves slightly differently than usual. These are ancient skills still operating quietly in the background. A lesser-known historical detail is that many traditional societies place strong emphasis on learning to read subtle social cues, often considering it as important as physical survival skills like hunting or foraging. Understanding people was understanding the environment, because in small communities, relationships were part of survival itself. You look around the camp again. Firelight flickers across faces, briefly illuminating expressions before fading into shadow. Each person appears as both familiar and distinct. Each movement carries meaning if you know how to observe it. The brain processes these signals constantly, even when you're not consciously aware of it. Neuroscientists often describe facial recognition as one of the most specialized and rapid functions of the human mind. It occurs in fractions of a second, integrating visual details into immediate emotional understanding. Yet how this system became so refined remains a topic of ongoing research. Some scholars argue it evolved primarily to support complex social networks. Others suggest it developed alongside environmental pattern recognition, sharing common cognitive foundations. The discussion is still open as the fire crackles softly. You think about how deeply interconnected these abilities are. Reading landscapes, reading weather, reading animals, reading people, all of them rely on the same underlying capacity to detect patterns, to interpret signals, to anticipate meaning. The night grows quieter. A cool breeze passes through the camp, carrying the scent of smoke and earth. Someone shifts in their sleep. Another adjusts their position near the fire, even in rest. The camp remains subtly alive. You lean back slightly and look upward again. The stars feel sharper tonight, clearer, almost closer. In ancient times, people often used constellations as guides, not only for navigation, but also for seasonal change and storytelling. Patterns in the sky became patterns in memory. A well-documented historical fact is that many early cultures developed complex star-based systems for tracking time, migration, and seasonal events, long before the invention of written calendars. Yet the exact origins of these systems are still debated among historians and archaeologists. Some believe they emerged independently in multiple regions. Others suggest knowledge may have spread through ancient migration routes. Either way, the night sky became a shared reference point for humanity across vast distances. You close your eyes for a moment. The sounds of the camp continue softly around you, firewood settling, distant water flowing. Occasional night calls from unseen animals. Everything blends into a gentle rhythm, and within that rhythm, your awareness begins to drift inward. But even as sleep approaches, the mind does not stop observing entirely. It continues to process, to connect, to recognize. The hidden human ability does not turn off. It simply quiets, like a fire glowing beneath as ash, still present, still alive, still part of you. And as the night deepens further, the ancient world continues to speak in its soft, continuous language of signals and patterns, waiting patiently for those who remember how to listen. The night has fully settled now, and the camp rests beneath a sky filled with quiet stars. The fire at the centre has dimmed further, now a low, steady glow that barely pushes back the darkness. Shadows stretch gently across the ground, soft and unthreatening. The air is cooled, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke, earth, and distant water. You lie still, listening, not only with your ears, but with something deeper, something older. The hidden human ability begins to reveal itself in a different way tonight. Not through movement, not through action, but through anticipation. The mind, even at rest, is always preparing. It predicts, it expects, it quietly builds models of what might come next. In the ancient world, this was essential. A sudden change in weather could alter everything. A distant animal sound might signal opportunity or danger. Even subtle shifts in the wind could matter. Survival often depended on what could be foreseen before it fully happened. You open your eyes slightly and look toward the fire. Its glow pulses gently, almost like breathing. Around you, others sleep or rest in silence, yet even in sleep, their minds continue working in the background, processing patterns gathered throughout the day. Modern neuroscience suggests that during rest, the human brain organizes and consolidates information, strengthening useful patterns while discarding irrelevant details. But long before science described it, ancient humans experienced it directly. They learned from dreams, from intuition, from sudden understanding that seemed to arise without effort. A mainstream historical understanding is that early humans relied heavily on experience-based prediction, using repeated exposure to environmental patterns to anticipate seasonal changes. Animal behavior and resource availability, however, scholars still debate how much of this ability was conscious strategy versus unconscious adaptation. Either way, it shaped survival for countless generations. You shift slightly on the ground. The earth beneath you holds the warmth of the day, slowly fading into coolness. Somewhere nearby, an animal calls out briefly into the night. No one reacts. The sound is known, understood. It carries no urgency. This too is part of the hidden ability. Discrimination. the ability to separate meaningful signals from background noise. Without it, the world would be overwhelming. Every sound would demand attention. Every movement would feel important. But the human mind learned to filter, to prioritize, to focus. A lesser-known historical observation is that experienced trackers and foragers in traditional societies often described the environment as having different levels of attention, where only certain signals were considered relevant depending on context, season, and need. In other words, attention itself was adaptive. You close your eyes again. The fire crackles softly. The rhythm is steady and predictable, and in that predictability, the mind finds comfort. Humans are drawn to patterns not only because they help with survival, but because they create a sense of order in an unpredictable world. This may explain why even modern people find comfort in familiar routines, repeated sounds, or predictable environments. The ancient brain still seeks structure. You breathe slowly, in, out. The air feels cool and clean. The night seems to deepen further, as if the world is gently dimming itself. Somewhere far beyond the camp, the landscape continues its quiet activity. Rivers flow. Wind moves through grass. Animals travel unseen paths. The world never truly stops, and neither does perception. Even when you're unaware of it, your senses continue gathering fragments of information, tiny signals that rarely reach consciousness, yet still influence feeling and thought. Neuroscientists often describe this as predictive processing, where the brain constantly interprets sensory input based on expectations formed from past experience. But for ancient humans, this was not theory. It was lived reality, a constant relationship between memory and environment. As you lie still, you begin to imagine how deeply this predictive awareness shaped daily life. Knowing when rain might come, knowing when animals would migrate, knowing when food sources would appear or disappear, not through calculation, but through accumulated observation, through lived attention. The firelight flickers again, softer now. A gentle breeze passes through the camp, briefly shifting the direction of smoke. You notice it without thinking. The change is subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it registers, and your mind stores it. A quiet reminder that awareness is always active, even in stillness. Some historians suggest that this continuous attentiveness was one of the key cognitive advantages of early Homo sapiens, allowing them to thrive across diverse and changing environments. Others argue that cooperation and language were equally or more important. The debate remains open. What is clear is that human survival depended on more than strength or speed. It depended on understanding, on interpretation, on the ability to make sense of a world that never stops moving. The night grows deeper still. The camp is now almost entirely silent. Only the faintest glow of embers remains. Above, stars continue their slow movement across the sky, and in this stillness, something subtle happens. The boundary between external world and internal awareness begins to soften. Thoughts drift more freely. Sensations blend gently with memory. The mind becomes less focused and more open. This is the space where intuition often emerges, not as mystery, but as integration. The quiet combination of countless small observations forming a feeling of understanding. You're not separate from the environment, you are part of its ongoing pattern, and as sleep finally begins to arrive, that realization fades gently into darkness. Not lost, just resting. Like everything else in the night is now at its deepest point, where even the idea of time feels softened and distant. The camp is almost entirely still. Firelight has faded into a quiet glow that barely outlines the shapes of sleeping bodies. The river nearby continues its steady movement, a constant presence that never changes its rhythm, even when everything else is at rest. You remain half awake, not fully thinking, not fully dreaming, somewhere in between, And in this in-between space, the hidden human ability begins to take on a more mysterious form. Dreaming in the ancient world. Dreams were not treated as separate from reality. They were often considered part of the same continuous experience of life. A message, a memory, a reflection, sometimes even a warning for early humans. The boundary between waking perception and inner experience was far less rigid than it is today. You shift slightly where you lie. The ground is cool now, having lost the warmth of daylight. Above you, the stars continue their silent movement, and as your awareness drifts, fragments of the day begin to reappear in your mind. The movement of animals across grasslands, the patterns in the soil, the quiet signals of wind and birds. But now they appear differently, less structured, more fluid. This is where something important happens inside the human mind. It begins reorganizing experience not consciously, but automatically. Modern neuroscience suggests that during sleep, the brain replays and processes recent experiences, strengthening useful connections and integrating new information into long-term memory. But ancient humans did not describe this in scientific terms. They described it as dreams, sometimes meaningful, sometimes confusing, sometimes deeply emotional. A mainstream historical understanding is that many early societies attributed significance to dreams, often interpreting them as symbolic guidance or reflections of hidden knowledge about the natural and social world. However, researchers still debate how universal or structured these interpretations were across different cultures. Some believe dream interpretation systems were highly developed. Others suggest they were more flexible and personal. Either way, dreams were clearly important in shaping how people understood their lives. You feel your thoughts drift further. The fire becomes less distinct. The sounds of the camp fade into a soft background hum. And for a moment, you're no longer fully aware of the landscape around you. Instead, you're inside it, walking through it again, but differently. In this state, the mind begins combining fragments of memory in unexpected ways. A path you walked during the day may appear again, but altered. An animal track may lead somewhere unfamiliar. A familiar face may appear in a new context. This blending is not random. It reflects how the brain processes patterns, testing connections and possibilities. A lesser-known historical observation is that some traditional cultures placed great importance on dreams as a continuation of daily awareness, sometimes using them as a way to reflect on hunting decisions, travel routes, or social relationships in such contexts. Dreams were not escape, they were extension. You slowly become aware of the fire again, though it feels distant. The world around you and the world within you seem to overlap gently. This overlapping sensation is part of what makes human cognition so unique. The ability to simulate experiences internally, to imagine scenarios that have not yet happened, to rehearse decisions before acting. This is another expression of the hidden ability, not just noticing reality, but modeling it. Your mind can run quiet simulations of the world, testing outcomes without physical risk. This capacity likely played a major role in human survival, allowing planning, anticipation, and flexible problem-solving. Some historians and cognitive scientists suggest that this internal simulation ability may be closely linked to the development of storytelling and imagination in early human societies. Others propose that it emerged gradually as a byproduct of complex perception and memory systems. The exact origin remains uncertain, but its impact is clear. You feel yourself drifting deeper into this quiet internal space. Thoughts no longer follow strict lines. They flow like water, soft, connected, unforced. In this state, the hidden ability feels less like observation and more like integration. Everything you have experienced during the day begins to connect. Tracking patterns, reading landscapes, recognizing faces, understanding signals, predicting movement. All of it blends into a single continuous awareness. The fire has now almost disappeared completely. Only faint warmth remains above. The sky feels endless, and in that endlessness, the mind continues its quiet work, sorting, connecting, reorganizing, until eventually, even the sense of being separate from the world begins to dissolve slightly, not in a dramatic way, but in a calm, natural fading, like sand settling in still water. And as sleep finally takes hold, the ancient world does not disappear, it simply changes form, becoming memory, becoming pattern, becoming part of you. Morning arrives with a different feeling today. Not just light returning to the world, but change settling quietly into the landscape. The camp is already awake when you open your eyes. People are moving with purpose, preparing supplies, checking tools, and organizing small bundles of food and materials. The air is cool, but not cold. A fire has been rebuilt, its flames steady and controlled. You notice something important right away. The rhythm of life is beginning to shift, not suddenly, not dramatically, but gradually, like a slow turning of the ground beneath everything. Today, you are entering a world where humans begin to change how they live. This is not yet cities, not yet writing, not yet machines. But something foundational is happening. A transition in the relationship between humans and the land itself. You join a group moving away from the familiar open terrain toward areas where people stay longer in one place. The landscape slowly changes as you travel. Wide grasslands give way to more structured environments. You begin noticing early signs of settled life. Hearths that remain in the same location. Storage areas for food. More deliberate shaping of shelters. Even the air feels slightly different, carrying the scent of repeated fires and long-term habitation. This is where the hidden human ability begins to transform. Because once humans stay in one place longer, attention changes. Instead of constantly scanning vast landscapes for movement, the mind begins focusing on detail within a smaller space. Patterns no longer stretch across miles. They gather around homes, fields and communities. The world becomes smaller in distance, but richer in complexity. You walk past an area where people are experimenting with early cultivation. The ground has been intentionally cleared. Certain plants are being encouraged to grow, others are removed. This is not yet agriculture as it will later become, but it is a step in that direction. A widely recognized historical development is that the shift toward plant cultivation occurred gradually in multiple regions of the world. As humans began influencing the growth cycles of wild species through repeated gathering and selective replanting. But the details of how this transition unfolded remain uneven across different archaeological interpretations. Some suggest it began with accidental encouragement of useful plants near camps. Others propose it was a deliberate long-term strategy developed over generations. You continue observing the area. The difference from earlier landscapes is subtle but important. Instead of following the land, people are beginning to shape it. Paths are more defined. Resource zones are more controlled. Knowledge becomes increasingly tied to specific places rather than wide roaming territories. You kneel near a small patch of soil where young plants are growing in neat clusters. Someone nearby explains, in simple gestures and brief words, how certain seeds are saved from one season to the next, how others are discarded, how timing matters more than anything else. A small but fascinating historical insight is that early forms of cultivation often began without clear separation between wild gathering and intentional planting, creating a long period where humans gradually influenced plant growth without fully realizing the long-term consequences of their actions. Standing here, you begin to see how this connects back to perception itself. The hidden human ability is adapting again in hunter-gatherer life. Attention was wide and mobile. In early settled life, attention becomes focused and sustained. Instead of tracking distant movement, humans begin tracking cycles within a known environment. Soil quality, seasonal timing, plant behavior, water management, everything becomes more detailed, more local, more predictable. You notice how people here observe their surroundings with a different kind of patience. Not the patience of travel, but the patience of waiting. Waiting for growth, waiting for change, waiting for patterns that unfold slowly over time. Modern researchers often describe this shift as one of the most important transformations in human history, because it fundamentally changed how people experience time, labour, and memory. Some emphasize economic and environmental pressures as the driving force behind it. Others highlight cultural innovation and experimentation. The exact balance is still discussed in academic circles. As the day continues, you help carry materials toward a cluster of shelters that appear more permanent than anything you have seen so far in this journey. Walls are sturdier, storage is more organised, spaces are more clearly defined. There is a sense of planning that extends beyond immediate survival. You pause for a moment and look around. Everything here feels like an extension of observation. People are still using the same hidden ability, but now it is applied differently. Instead of scanning vast open worlds, they are reading smaller, more controlled systems. The principle remains the same: notice patterns, understand relationships, predict outcomes, but the scale has changed. By late afternoon, clouds drift slowly overhead, casting soft moving shadows across the settlement. You sit beside a structure made of wood and woven material. Nearby, someone tends to stored food supplies, checking for changes in moisture and condition. Even this requires careful awareness. Nothing is left unattended for long. A small detail catches your attention. A child watching how adults handle seeds with unusual care, almost as if each one carries significance. And in a way, it does, because in this emerging world, small decisions begin to accumulate into long-term survival. As evening approaches, you realize that the hidden human ability has not diminished. It has simply changed direction. It is no longer only about following the land, it is about shaping it. And that realization settles quietly as the light fades, marking another step in humanity's long transformation. The night arrives gently over the settled landscape. Unlike the open grasslands of earlier days, this place holds the darkness differently. It feels slightly enclosed, softened by structures that remain standing even after the sun disappears. Fires burn in multiple small clusters rather than one central blaze. Their light flickers against wooden frames, woven materials, and packed earth walls. You sit near one of these fires and observe the quiet activity around you. People are still awake, not because they must travel, not because they are hunting, but because life here has gained new layers of responsibility. There is always something to maintain, something to repair, something to prepare for tomorrow. This marks another subtle shift in human attention. The hidden ability is now being used not only for immediate survival, but for continuity, for planning, for remembering across longer stretches of time. In earlier environments, awareness was often directed outward toward changing landscapes. Now it begins turning inward toward stored knowledge. You watch as someone checks a series of containers carefully placed along a wooden platform. Food is being preserved, not just gathered for the day, but stored for the future. This simple act represents a profound transformation in human thinking. Time is no longer only experienced as present moments. It begins to stretch forward. A widely accepted historical understanding is that the development of food storage practices played a crucial role in supporting early settled communities, allowing populations to remain in one place through seasonal changes and periods of scarcity. However, the exact pace and origin of these practices vary across regions, and researchers continue to refine their interpretations based on new archaeological findings. You shift closer to the fire as a cool breeze moves through the settlement. The flames respond slightly, bending with the air before returning upright. Nearby, you notice how people talk differently here compared to earlier journeys. Conversations are less about immediate surroundings and more about planning, repairs needed for shelters, timing for planting, distribution of stored goods. Attention is being directed towards systems rather than momentary events. This is an important change. The hidden human ability is now operating on longer timescales, instead of tracking movement across a valley. People are tracking cycles across months, even years. You think back to earlier sections of your journey, when attention meant noticing a single footprint or a shift in wind direction. Now attention includes memory of entire seasons, patterns that unfold slowly, changes that cannot be seen in a single glance. A small but interesting historical observation is that early settled communities often developed shared systems of knowledge for tracking seasonal cycles, which may have included simple counting methods, environmental markers, or oral schedules passed carefully through generations. These systems were not uniform. They varied widely depending on geography and culture, but they all served a similar purpose: to extend awareness beyond the immediate moment. You look toward the edge of the settlement where faint outlines of cultivated areas stretch into the darkness. Even at night, these spaces feel different from the surrounding land. They are shaped, organized, maintained. Human attention has left its imprint there, and in return, those spaces demand continuous observation. Nothing can be ignored for too long. Everything must be monitored. As the fire crackles softly beside you, you begin to understand something subtle but important. The hidden human ability is not static. It evolves alongside human environments, in wide open landscapes. It becomes expansive and alert. In settled environments, it becomes structured and sustained. In both cases, it depends on the same foundation: noticing patterns, interpreting signals, anticipating change. The difference lies in what those patterns belong to: the natural world, or the human-shaped world. You lean back slightly and look upward. The stars are visible again above the settlement, though slightly dimmer than in open landscapes. Some light from the fires below reaches upward, softening the sky. Still. The constellations remain. Still. The night offers orientation. A well-established archaeological perspective suggests that even after the rise of early settlements, many communities continue to rely on celestial patterns for timing seasonal activities, navigation, and agricultural planning, blending older observational skills with emerging forms of organized living. Yet scholars continue to debate how quickly these changes became standardized across different regions. Some argue for gradual adaptation. Others suggest periods of rapid transformation tied to environmental shifts. The discussion remains open. Around you, the settlement slowly quiets. People begin settling into rest. Voices fade, movements slow. The fires continue burning, but more gently now. You close your eyes for a moment and listen. The world here feels layered. Earth beneath, structures around, sky above. Human life woven through all of it. The hidden ability continues to operate quietly within this new environment, not as survival in the wild, but as understanding within structure. And as sleep begins to approach, you realize something simple. Whether in open grasslands or settled ground, whether tracking animals or managing fields, whether navigating vast landscapes or organizing a home, the human mind is always doing the same quiet work: watching, learning, adjusting, and remembering. Morning returns with a softer rhythm than in earlier parts of your journey. Light spreads gradually over the settled landscape, touching rooftops, storage areas, and cultivated plots in a slow, familiar pattern. Smoke rises from several small fires rather than one central source, each one serving a different part of daily life. You step outside and notice how much more structured everything feels now. Paths are clearer, movement is more predictable, spaces are divided with purpose. Life here is becoming organised in ways that feel almost invisible at first, but increasingly meaningful the longer you observe. Today, you join people who are moving between nearby settlements. Short journeys replace long wandering, known routes replace open exploration, and yet the same hidden human ability is still present beneath it all. Only now, it is working in a different context. You walk along a path that has been used many times before. The ground is slightly worn, shaped by repeated footsteps along the way. People point out landmarks that are no longer just natural features, but shared reference points, a distinctive tree, a bend in the river, a cluster of stones arranged in a recognizable pattern. These markers function like memory extended into the environment itself. A widely recognized historical development is that as human communities became more settled, networks of paths and shared landmarks gradually evolved into early systems of regional connectivity, allowing communication and exchange between groups over increasing distances. However, the exact speed and organization of these networks remains a subject of ongoing research. As evidence varies across regions and time periods, you continue walking as the morning grows warmer. The landscape feels both familiar and newly complex. Familiar because you're no longer seeing it as raw wilderness. Complex because it is now layered with human meaning. You notice how attention here is divided between natural signals and human signals. The wind still matters, the sky still matters, but now so do stored knowledge, shared routes, and community patterns. At a resting point along the journey, you sit with a small group beside a shallow stream. People exchange information about conditions in nearby areas, which paths are easier to travel, where food is more abundant, which regions have recently changed due to weather. This exchange of knowledge feels natural, almost effortless, yet it represents a powerful extension of the hidden ability. Information is no longer only gathered individually, it is shared collectively. A small but important historical insight is that many early societies developed informal communication networks through travel, storytelling, and seasonal gatherings, allowing information about resources and environmental changes to spread between distant groups without written records. These networks were flexible and adaptive, changing with conditions and relationships. You dip your hand into the stream again. The water is cooler here, flowing steadily over smooth stones. As you watch it move, you begin to notice how many patterns in this world depend on repetition. Water follows channels carved over time. Paths form where people walk repeatedly. Knowledge spreads through repeated exchange. Even memory itself strengthens through repetition. The group eventually continues along the route. As you travel, you begin to see how human attention is now distributed across two worlds at once. The natural environment still demands awareness. Weather, animals, terrain. But the human environment now demands awareness as well. Social relationships, shared resources, collective decisions. The hidden ability has expanded rather than changed. It now operates on multiple layers simultaneously. You pass by a section of land where early forms of boundary marking appear. Simple arrangements of stones and cleared spaces suggest defined areas of use, not rigid ownership in a modern sense, but understood territories, places associated with particular groups or activities. This introduces a new dimension to perception. Space is no longer only physical, it becomes social. Meaning is layered onto geography. As afternoon approaches, the group reaches a neighbouring settlement. The transition is subtle at first, then increasingly clear. Different arrangements of shelters, different patterns of movement, different ways of organising shared space, yet the underlying similarities remain strong. Fire, shelter, food storage, community interaction, the same core elements of human life. only arranged differently. You observe how people here greet each other with familiarity, even when they have not met recently. Recognition is still essential. Memory still matters. The ability to distinguish individuals, relationships, and roles continues to shape daily life. A lesser-known anthropological observation is that early interconnected communities often relied heavily on personal memory and verbal acknowledgement to maintain social structure. As written identification systems did not yet exist, this placed great importance on attentiveness during social interaction, to notice, to remember, to recognize correctly. As evening approaches, you sit at the edge of the settlement and watch activity slow. The sky turns golden, then deeper orange. Smoke rises in thin lines above rooftops. The sound of conversation fades into a gentle background hum. You realize that attention here has become even more complex than before. It is no longer just about environment, or survival, or planning. It is about integration. Combining natural awareness with social understanding, combining memory with observation, combining individual perception with shared knowledge. The firelight begins to appear once more as night approaches, and as you sit quietly among the settling rhythms of this connected world, you understand that the hidden human ability is not tied to a single stage of history. It moves with humanity, adapts with it, grows with it, always present, always evolving. Night settles once again over a world that now feels more connected than before. The settlement is quiet, but not empty, even in rest. There is structure. Fires glow in smaller clusters, marking different parts of daily life. Some areas remain active a little longer, where people continue preparing tools or finishing small tasks. Others fall into deep silence early, as if the land itself is learning new rhythms. You sit near one of the remaining fires. The warmth is steady against the cool night air. Smoke rises gently, thinning as it reaches the sky. Above you, stars remain visible, though their clarity shifts slightly depending on the light below. Tonight, your attention turns towards something quieter. Not movement, not landscape, but learning itself. Because in this stage of human development, the hidden ability begins to take on a new form again. It becomes teaching and remembering. In earlier parts of your journey, knowledge was absorbed directly from the environment. Tracks in soil, changes in wind, animal behavior, plant cycles. Now, knowledge begins to exist inside human systems. People are no longer only learning from nature. They are learning from each other more deliberately. You observe a small group gathered slightly apart from the main fires. An older individual speaks calmly while others listen closely. There are gestures toward the ground, toward tools, toward distant fields. Nothing is written down, nothing is recorded externally, yet the information is precise, structured, and repeated carefully. A widely acknowledged historical development is that as human societies became more settled, education gradually shifted from purely observational learning toward more intentional forms of instruction within families and communities. However, researchers still explore how formalized these early teaching practices truly were, since evidence varies widely between archaeological sites and cultural interpretations. You notice how the listeners respond. They do not interrupt. They do not rush. They absorb, then repeat, then refine. This is how memory strengthens in a world without external storage. Repetition is not redundancy here. It is survival. You shift your position closer to the firelight. The flames flicker softly, casting moving patterns across faces. Each expression briefly appears, then fades into shadow again. It makes you think about how much information in this world is still carried in living minds rather than in objects. Skills, roots, plant knowledge, seasonal timing, social relationships, all held internally, all dependent on attention and recall. A small but interesting historical insight is that many early communities relied heavily on oral repetition and communal reinforcement to preserve essential knowledge, often embedding practical information within stories, rituals, and shared activities rather than isolating it as separate instruction. This blending of knowledge and daily life made learning continuous rather than formal. You lean back slightly and listen to the sounds around you. Low conversation, occasional laughter, the soft crackle of burning wood. Somewhere in the distance, a nightbird calls briefly, then falls silent again, even here. Attention continues working in the background. People notice tone of voice, changes in rhythm, small shifts in behaviour. These subtle cues carry meaning, often more than words themselves. The hidden ability is becoming more social in this stage of human history. Not just environmental awareness, but interpersonal awareness. Understanding people becomes just as important as understanding land. You think back to earlier sections of your journey when attention was focused on tracks, winds, and distant movements across open terrain. Now attention includes intention, memory, and shared meaning. Modern neuroscience often describes human cognition as deeply social, shaped by the need to understand others, predict behavior, and maintain group cooperation. Some scholars argue this social dimension may have been one of the strongest forces shaping human intelligence. Others emphasize environmental challenges as equally important drivers. The discussion continues. But the overlap is clear. Human minds evolved in relationship with both nature and community. As the fire burns lower, you notice how the group gradually becomes quieter. People begin preparing to sleep. Some lie down near the warmth, others settle into shelters. The night becomes more still, and in this stillness, the idea of learning itself feels different. It is no longer something separate from life. It is woven into it. Every conversation, every observation, every shared moment becomes part of a larger system of understanding. You close your eyes for a moment. The warmth of the fire fades slightly against the cool air. The sounds of the settlement continue softly, then slowly diminish, and you realize something subtle but important. The hidden human ability is not only about noticing the world, it is also about passing that noticing forward. From one mind to another, from one generation to the next, knowledge becomes shared attention, and shared attention becomes culture. As sleep begins to arrive again, the night feels less like darkness and more like continuity, a steady presence surrounding everything, holding it together. The night feels deeper now, as if the world has settled into a slower rhythm that stretches across time itself. The camp is quiet, with only faint traces of firelight remaining. Most people are asleep or resting inside simple shelters. The air is cool, carrying the gentle scent of ash and earth. Above, the sky is wide and uninterrupted, filled with steady points of light. You remain awake a little longer, not because of urgency, but because your attention feels different tonight, more reflective, more aware of connections that stretch beyond the present moment. In this stage of human history, something subtle is beginning to emerge. Knowledge is no longer only shared face to face. It is beginning to accumulate across time. You notice how conversations from earlier in the day continue to echo in your mind. Instructions, observations, small pieces of advice. None of them exist physically, yet all of them remain active in thought. This is one of the most important developments in human cognition. The ability to carry information forward, not just in memory, but in structured, repeatable forms. A widely recognized historical transition is that as human societies became more complex, knowledge increasingly needed to be preserved beyond individual lifespans, leading to early symbolic systems and eventually written communication in different regions of the world. However, scholars continue to debate how quickly these systems emerged independently versus how much they were influenced by interaction between communities. You shift slightly where you lie. The ground is firm but comfortable, warmed earlier by the fading fire. Nearby, someone turns in their sleep, then becomes still again. The world feels stable here, yet your mind is active. You begin thinking about how fragile knowledge would be without continuity. If every generation had to relearn everything from the beginning, progress would remain limited. But something changed in human history. Information began to accumulate, layer upon layer, experience upon experience. You imagine a long chain stretching backward in time, each link representing a life, a set of observations, a collection of learned patterns, a quiet transmission of understanding. A small but meaningful historical insight is that many early communities used oral repetition, ritual performance, and structured storytelling as ways to preserve essential knowledge across generations, ensuring that important survival information remained stable even without written records. These systems were not static. They adapted as environments and communities changed. You look up at the sky again. The stars feel almost motionless, though you know they are not. They continue their slow movement across the night. Just as human knowledge continues its gradual transformation across generations, you think about how attention itself has evolved through everything you have experienced so far, from open landscapes where awareness stretched across vast distances, to settled environments where awareness focused on structure and routine, to social environments where awareness became shared and communicative, and now to a stage where awareness begins to extend through time, not just noticing what is present, but preserving what has been noticed. This is where the hidden human ability becomes something more than perception. It becomes continuity. You hear a distant sound outside the camp, a brief movement in the grass, an animal passing through the night. No one reacts. The sound is understood without needing attention. The mind filters it instantly, placing it in the category of known and harmless patterns. This automatic classification is part of the same system that allows humans to build knowledge over time, recognize, sort, store, retrieve, apply. This cycle continues quietly in every moment, even during rest, even during sleep. You close your eyes again. Thoughts begin to slow, but they do not disappear. Instead, they soften and connect. Images from earlier days return briefly. Landscapes, tracks, firelight, faces, words, each one blending gently into the next. Modern cognitive science often describes memory as reconstructive rather than static, meaning that each recall is a partial rebuilding influenced by both past experience and present state. Yet the lived experience of memory in early human societies likely felt continuous and deeply integrated into daily life. Some researchers suggest that this integration may have been essential for survival, allowing communities to maintain coherence without external records. Others argue that social reinforcement played an equally important role in stabilizing shared knowledge. The discussion remains ongoing. As sleep approaches more fully, your awareness drifts further inward. The boundary between remembering and imagining becomes softer. Stories merge with observation. Experience merges with interpretation. And in this gentle blending, the hidden human ability reveals its most subtle form. It is not only about seeing the world, it is about carrying the world within you, not as weight, but as pattern, as understanding, as continuity across time. The fire has now nearly faded completely. Only faint warmth remains in the ground beneath you. Above, the night stretches endlessly. And within that vastness, human awareness continues its quiet work, preserving, connecting, evolving, even in sleep. The night is no longer fully dark in your perception, not because anything has changed outside, but because something has shifted within. You find yourself in a quieter mental space now, where thoughts rise slowly and dissolve just as gently. The camp around you remains asleep. The fire has almost completely faded, leaving only a soft warmth embedded in the ground and a faint glow of embers barely visible in the dark. Above, the sky remains constant, yet your attention no longer moves outward as much as it once did. Instead, it begins to turn inward. This is where another layer of the hidden human ability becomes visible. Reflection, the capacity to revisit experience and extract meaning from it. In earlier stages of this journey, you observed humans reading landscapes, tracking animals, gathering plants, and navigating terrain. Now you begin to observe something equally important, humans reading themselves. You think back across everything you have witnessed, not as separate scenes, but as connected patterns, attention in motion, attention in settlement, attention in social life, attention in memory. Each stage did not replace the previous one. It built upon it, layered it, extended it. A well-established historical perspective in anthropology suggests that human cognitive development is best understood as cumulative, with each major shift in lifestyle expanding rather than replacing earlier forms of perception and learning. However, the precise sequence and overlap of these changes is still actively reconstructed from archaeological and ethnographic evidence. You shift slightly where you lie. The ground feels cooler now, as the last traces of daytime warmth slowly disappear. The night air is still, yet not empty. Even silence carries structure. Faint sounds from the river continue in the distance, steady and unchanged. You begin to notice how your mind organizes everything you've experienced, not randomly, but in clusters, patterns, connections. For example, the way environmental awareness and social awareness share the same foundation. Both rely on noticing subtle signals. Both rely on interpretation. Both rely on prediction. A small but insightful observation from archaeological research is that many early human technologies and cultural practices appear to have developed simultaneously in different regions, suggesting that similar cognitive abilities may have emerged independently under comparable environmental pressures. In other words, the human mind was consistently solving similar problems in different places, just in different forms. You breathe slowly, in, out. The rhythm feels steady, natural, almost grounding, around you. The sleeping camp feels like a temporary pause in a much larger process. Life continues even in stillness. Knowledge continues even in silence. You begin to understand that awareness is not something that switches on and off. It flows, even now. Your brain is processing fragments of the day, sorting them, organizing them, strengthening some connections while letting others fade. Modern neuroscience often describes this as a continuous integration process, where experience is not only stored but reorganized over time to improve future prediction and decision-making. Yet long before such descriptions existed, humans already lived within this process. They simply called it remembering, or learning, or understanding. You turn your attention briefly to the stars again. They appear unchanged, yet familiar now in a deeper way, not just as lights in the sky, but as reference points for time, direction, and continuity. A notable historical insight drawn from multiple cultural records is that early societies across different continents independently developed systems of observing celestial patterns to track seasonal cycles and guide communal activities. The specific interpretations varied widely, shaped by local environments and traditions, but the underlying act of sustained observation remained consistent. You close your eyes again. The boundary between thought and memory feels thinner now. Earlier experiences return gently. Walking through grasslands, watching hunters track movement, observing gatherers distinguish plants, following navigators across open terrain. Each memory carries a sense of attention embedded within it, as if you're not only remembering what happened, but how it was noticed. This is an important distinction. The hidden human ability is not just about collecting information, it is about the quality of attention that shapes that information in the first place. You begin to sense how deeply this quality influences everything. What was seen, what was ignored, what was remembered, what was forgotten. All of it depends on where attention rested. A lesser-known anthropological observation is that many traditional knowledge systems emphasize training attention itself, often through repetition, observation exercises, and guided participation in daily tasks, rather than focusing solely on memorizing information in such systems. Perception is treated as a skill that can be refined over time, not a fixed trait. The fire is now fully faded. Only warmth remains in the earth beneath you. The night feels vast but not distant. It feels close, almost inside you, and in this quiet state, something subtle becomes clear. The hidden human ability has never been one single faculty. It is a network, a continuous interaction between perception, memory, prediction, and understanding. It connects every moment you have experienced in this journey, and it continues now, even as sleep gently arrives again, not as an ending, but as continuation in another form. Morning arrives softly again, almost imperceptibly, as if the world is careful not to disturb your rest. Light seeps into the sky before it fully touches the ground. The camp is already beginning to stir, not with urgency, but with familiarity. People rise, stretch, and move into the early routines of another day that feels both new and deeply familiar. The fire is rebuilt with practiced ease. A small flame catches, then grows. Smoke rises in a thin line toward the pale sky. You sit up slowly and observe the settlement around you. By now, this world feels less like something you're visiting, and more like something you're beginning to understand from the inside. And today, something new will become clearer. The hidden human ability is not only about perception, memory, or prediction. It is also about coordination, the ability to align minds, to share intention, to act together as one flexible system. You join a group preparing for collective work. There is no formal announcement, no written plan, yet everyone seems to understand what needs to be done. Some will tend to food storage, others will repair structures. A few will travel to nearby areas to exchange goods or information. The organization feels fluid, but remarkably effective. You notice how communication happens in layers, a glance, a gesture, a brief exchange of words, a pause that carries meaning without explanation. A widely recognized finding in anthropology is that early human cooperation depended heavily on nonverbal communication and shared contextual understanding, allowing groups to coordinate complex activities without formal instruction or written systems. However, researchers continue to explore how such coordination scaled as human groups grew larger and more complex. You move with a small team toward a section of the settlement where repairs are needed. Wooden structures show signs of wear. Materials must be replaced or reinforced. As you begin working, you realize something subtle but important. No one person directs everything. Instead, attention is distributed. Each individual notices what needs attention within their immediate space, then responds, adjusts, contributes. It feels less like hierarchy and more like shared awareness. The hidden ability is now operating collectively, not just inside one mind, but across many minds working in alignment. You pause briefly and look around. Someone notices a loose section of material before it becomes a problem. Another anticipates where reinforcement will be needed next. Someone else adjusts a tool without being asked. These small actions form a larger pattern of cooperation. A small but meaningful historical insight is that many early communities likely relied on this kind of distributed coordination, where shared experience and constant observation allowed groups to function effectively without centralized planning systems. In such environments, awareness itself becomes a communal resource. You continue working. The rhythm of activity is steady, unforced, natural. Time passes in a way that feels different from earlier stages of your journey, less defined by movement across space, more defined by cycles of shared effort. As midday approaches, the group pauses. People sit together in shaded areas. Tools are set aside. Water is shared. Conversation begins softly, often returning to practical matters, but occasionally something else appears: laughter, brief storytelling, small reflections about past events. Even in structured environments, the human mind continues to seek meaning beyond immediate necessity. A lesser-known anthropological observation is that early settled communities often developed informal gatherings that combined work, storytelling, and knowledge exchange, reinforcing both social bonds and practical understanding within the group. These moments helped maintain cohesion, not through rules, but through shared attention. You sit near the edge of the settlement and watch the surrounding landscape. Even though this environment is shaped by humans, it is still deeply connected to natural cycles. Wind moves through grass beyond the structures. Birds cross the sky in familiar patterns. Light shifts as clouds pass overhead. Human life does not replace nature. It overlays it, and both continue interacting constantly. Modern researchers often describe this relationship as co-adaptation, where human systems and natural environments evolve together over time, influencing each other in continuous feedback loops. Yet the lived experience of this interaction in early societies was not conceptual. It was immediate, practical, every day. As afternoon light grows warmer, you help carry materials toward another section of the settlement. While walking, you notice how awareness has become almost automatic. You no longer need to consciously search for meaning in the environment. It appears on its own. A worn path, a change in wind, a shift in sound, a movement at the edge of vision. Attention now flows continuously, shaped by experience. This is one of the most profound aspects of the hidden human ability. It becomes invisible when fully developed, not because it disappears, but because it integrates completely into perception. A well-documented historical perspective suggests that as human societies became more complex, many cognitive skills transitioned from conscious effort to automatic processing through repetition and cultural learning. This allowed individuals to focus on higher-level coordination and problem-solving. You set down the materials and look across the settlement once more. Everything feels interconnected: work, rest, movement, communication, observation, all part of a single living system. As evening approaches again, the pace slows. The sky shifts toward gold and then deeper tones of blue. Fires begin to appear across the settlement, and as you sit down to rest, you realize something quietly profound. The hidden human ability is not just inside individuals, it is also between them, a shared field of attention, a collective awareness shaped by countless small acts of noticing and responding. And as night returns, that shared awareness continues softly into darkness. Night settles over the settlement with a familiar softness, as if darkness itself has learned the shape of human life here. Fires burn in steady clusters again, smaller than before but carefully maintained. The glow spreads across nearby structures, turning wood and woven materials into shifting silhouettes. The air is cool, but not harsh. It carries the quiet rhythm of a place that no longer fears the night in the same way it once did. You sit near the edge of one of the fires, listening, not to words, but to patterns within sound, a crackle of burning wood, a a distant footstep on packed earth, a soft murmur from another group nearby. Even silence feels structured now, shaped by familiarity and shared presence. In this stage of human development, something subtle becomes more visible. Attention is no longer just a personal tool. It is becoming a shared environment. You notice how people around the fire occasionally glance in similar directions without speaking. Someone adjusts their position slightly, and another responds without being told. These small, almost invisible exchanges form a kind of coordination that does not require explanation. It simply happens. A widely recognized concept in anthropology is that human cooperation evolved alongside increasing sensitivity to social cues, allowing groups to synchronize behavior through subtle signals rather than explicit instruction. However, scholars continue to refine their understanding of how this synchronization developed across different early societies and environmental conditions. You shift slightly closer to the firelight. Warmth spreads across your hands and face. The night feels calm, but not empty. It feels inhabited by awareness around you. The settlement continues its quiet rhythm. Some people are still awake, maintaining fire, checking materials, or simply sitting in shared silence. Others are already asleep, their presence still part of the collective structure of the camp. You begin to understand something more clearly now. Human attention has never existed in isolation. Even in solitude, it carries traces of others, their voices, their habits, their knowledge, their expectations. This interconnectedness becomes even more important as societies grow larger and more complex. A small but meaningful historical insight is that early human communities often relied on continuous informal feedback between individuals to maintain order and coordination. Long before formal systems of governance or written communication existed. In such settings, awareness of others was not optional, it was fundamental. You look into the fire, the flames shift and fold in on themselves, never repeating the same pattern twice, yet always recognizable as fire. This balance between change and familiarity feels strangely reflective of human cognition itself, stable enough to understand, flexible enough to adapt. You think back through everything you've witnessed so far in this journey, tracking across open landscapes, reading subtle environmental signals, recognizing plants and seasonal cycles, navigating vast terrain using memory and observation, learning within settled communities, sharing knowledge through repeated interaction, coordinating work without formal systems. Each stage reveals a different expression of the same underlying ability, the capacity to notice, interpret, and respond. Modern cognitive science often describes this as predictive and socially embedded perception, where the brain continuously integrates environmental and social information to guide behavior in real time. Yet, in the lived experience of early humans, this was not abstract theory. It was daily existence. You hear a brief sound beyond the settlement boundary, an animal moving through grass. No one reacts strongly, not because it is ignored, but because it is understood within context. This immediate classification of meaning is part of the same system that allows coordinated life to function smoothly. A lesser-known anthropological observation is that many early societies developed extremely refined sensitivity to changes in group behavior, allowing individuals to detect shifts in mood, intention, or risk almost instinctively. This sensitivity was often described in later accounts as intuition. Though it was rooted in continuous observation and experience, you lean back slightly and look upward. The sky above the settlement is darker than earlier stages of your journey, but still open and wide. Stars remain visible between faint traces of smoke rising from the fires below. In earlier environments, the sky was a guide for movement. Now it becomes more of a shared reference point, marking time and continuity for a community that is increasingly settled. A well-established historical perspective suggests that as human societies developed more complex structures, celestial observation continued to play an important role in organizing communal life, particularly in relation to seasonal cycles and agricultural planning. However, the exact ways these observations were standardized remain a subject of ongoing research, with interpretations differing across regions and archaeological findings. You close your eyes briefly. The sounds around you soften again. Fire, breathing, distant movement. Everything blends into a low, continuous rhythm. And within that rhythm, your awareness drifts inward once more. You begin to notice how attention itself has changed throughout this journey, from wide scanning awareness in open landscapes, to focused awareness in structured settlements, to shared awareness in cooperative systems, and now to something even more subtle, awareness of awareness itself, the ability to reflect, to integrate, to understand not only what is seen, but how it is seen as sleep approaches. The boundary between individual and environment feels less defined, not blurred, but connected, like threads in the same fabric, and in that quiet realization, the hidden human ability feels less like a skill, and more like a way of being, one that has accompanied humanity through every stage of its long and evolving story. The night feels deeper now, but not heavier. It carries a sense of quiet familiarity, as if you have begun to understand its language. The settlement rests almost entirely in sleep. Fires glow at their lowest strength, just enough to mark presence rather than illuminate activity. Shadows lie still between structures, softened by the faint movement of air across the ground. You remain awake for a little longer, not out of necessity, but because something within your attention feels different tonight, more settled, more integrated, as if many separate threads of understanding are slowly weaving into a single pattern. In earlier stages of this journey, you experienced attention as something directed outward, constantly scanning the world for signals. Later, it became organized within human communities, shaped by cooperation and shared meaning. Now, it begins to feel less divided at all, more continuous, more unified. This is where the hidden human ability reaches one of its most subtle expressions. Not heightened perception, not sharper senses, but coherence. The ability to bring many forms of information together into a single understanding of the world. You look around the sleeping camp. Everything is still, yet not disconnected. Each shelter, each fire, each resting figure feels part of a larger system that continues even in silence. Human life does not pause here. It simply shifts form. A widely recognized idea in cognitive anthropology is that human intelligence is deeply integrative, constantly combining sensory input, memory, social awareness, and environmental knowledge into unified models that guide behavior. However, researchers continue to explore how this integration process developed across different stages of human evolution, and how much of it is shaped by culture versus biology. You shift slightly where you sit. The ground beneath you is cool now, holding only faint traces of earlier warmth. The night air moves gently across the settlement, carrying distant sounds that fade before they become distinct. You notice how easily your mind now interprets these signals without effort. A soft sound is categorized instantly. A movement is understood without analysis. A pattern is recognized before it is consciously examined. What once required deliberate attention now happens almost automatically. This is one of the most important transformations in human cognition. Not the ability to notice more, but the ability to process more at once. A small but meaningful historical insight is that as human societies developed greater complexity, individuals increasingly relied on rapid integration of multiple types of information, allowing faster decision-making in both environmental and social contexts. This did not replace earlier abilities. It layered them, built upon them, extended them. You lie back slightly and look toward the sky again. The stars appear unchanged, yet your perception of them feels different now. Earlier, they were guides for movement and survival. Later, they became markers of time and seasonal change. Now, they feel like part of a broader system of meaning that connects observation, memory, and continuity. The sky is no longer separate from human life. It is woven into it. You think about how many layers of awareness exist simultaneously in this world. The physical layer of land and weather, the biological layer of plants and animals, the social layer of human interaction, the temporal layer of memory and anticipation, all of them overlapping, all of them constantly shifting. Modern interdisciplinary research often describes human cognition as multi-level processing, where different systems in the brain operate in parallel to construct a coherent experience of reality. Yet in the lived experience of early humans, this was not divided into concepts. It was simply life. You hear a faint sound from somewhere near the edge of the settlement, a branch shifting, a small movement. It's noticed briefly, then absorbed into understanding without disruption. No one wakes. No one reacts. The signal is already interpreted. This seamless filtering and interpretation is part of the same system that allows humans to function in complex environments without being overwhelmed. A lesser-known anthropological observation is that many early communities developed extremely refined forms of contextual awareness, where meaning depended not only on the signal itself but on its timing, location, and relationship to other ongoing events. In other words, nothing was interpreted in isolation. Everything was connected. You close your eyes again. The fire beside you is now barely visible, reduced to a faint glow that blends into the darkness. Your breathing slows. Thoughts become softer, less structured, and in this space between waking and sleep, the sense of self feels less separate from the environment around it, not disappearing, but blending, like a voice joining a larger quiet chorus. You realize that throughout this entire journey, the hidden human ability has never been something added onto humanity. It has always been present, shifting shape, adapting form, expressing itself differently depending on the environment, society, and time, but always there, always working, even now, especially now, as sleep begins to take you once more. The world does not fade. It simply continues without needing to be observed. And in that continuity, awareness rests gently, as if returning to something it has always known. You wake before dawn on the final morning of this journey. For a few moments, the world remains suspended between night and day. The fire has faded to a soft red glow. The river moves quietly through the darkness. A cool breeze drifts across the settlement carrying the scent of water, earth, and distant trees. Everything feels peaceful. You step outside and look toward the eastern horizon. A faint silver light has begun to appear. The stars still linger overhead, though their brightness is slowly fading. One by one, they surrender the sky to the approaching day. The settlement around you sleeps. Shelters rest in silence. Tools lie where they were placed the evening before. The familiar pathways between hearths remain empty, for the first time in many sections. You simply stand still and look. The journey has been long. You began in a world shaped by ice, a world of vast grasslands, wandering herds, and uncertain seasons. You crossed landscapes transformed by warming temperatures. You followed rivers altered by melting glaciers. You watched forests spread across land once dominated by open plains. You witnessed coastlines move, animals disappear, communities adapt, again and again. The story has never really been about climate alone. It has always been about perception. about how humans notice the world, how they interpret it, how they survive within it, and how that survival slowly transforms into understanding. A widely supported conclusion in anthropology is that human success is deeply tied to cognitive flexibility, the ability to adjust perception, behavior, and cooperation in response to changing environments over long periods of time. Yet researchers continue to refine how this flexibility developed, and how different pressures shaped it across regions and eras. You walk slowly toward the river. The water reflects the first light of morning, breaking into soft patterns across its surface. Everything feels quieter than before, not because sound has changed, but because attention has changed. You notice more by noticing less. You understand more by letting things simply be observed without effort. This is perhaps the deepest expression of the hidden human ability. Not heightened alertness, not constant analysis, but balanced awareness. A state where perception and understanding move together without strain. A small but meaningful historical insight is that many early human traditions emphasized harmony with environment not as an abstract philosophy, but as a practical necessity for survival, where long-term success depended on sustained observation, patience, and adaptation rather than short-term control. You sit beside the river, the current moves steadily, unchanged by human presence. In it, you see reflections of the sky, the land, and the world around you, all merging into one continuous surface. It feels like a quiet summary of everything you have witnessed. Separation becoming connection, observation becoming understanding, experience becoming memory, and memory becoming part of identity. You close your eyes. The sound of water continues softly beside you. In this final moment of stillness, you realize something simple and clear. The hidden human ability was never hidden in the sense of being lost. It was hidden in plain sight, present in every era, in every environment, in every version of humanity you have walked through. It is the ability to notice the world deeply enough that it becomes meaningful, and to carry that meaning forward, not as information alone, but as lived understanding. The light grows stronger now. Morning fully arrives, the camp begins to wake, and as the day returns, you feel no separation between the ancient world and the present moment. Only continuity, only awareness, only the quiet, enduring capacity to see. And as you take one final look across the landscape, the journey gently comes to rest. Sweet dreams.